Hi, and welcome to a special American history episode of InstaVision. I'm Glenn Reynolds. Well, we hear a lot of American history these days, but most of it seems to be kind of a downer. Stories that paint America in a bad light and suggest that the founding generation wasn't really so great, and American ideals aren't really so great, and all of that. Well, my guest is not one of those people. As a matter of fact, he's written a really interesting and positive history of the American Revolution. He's Brian Kilmeade. He's a host at Fox and Friends. He's got his own radio show, which I actually listen to pretty regularly. And he's the co-author of George Washington's Secret Six, the spy ring that saved the American Revolution. And even suggests that that was a good thing. Welcome, Brian. Good to have you.
Yeah, we were pro beating the British. That's one thing we made clear in the introduction. We're glad we won.
Well, you know, I joke that that's a gutsy stand to take, but actually nowadays, hey, it probably is.
Yeah, well, essentially, we know how the war went. We know it was impossible odds that we beat the British, but not many people cared much more than, is this going to be on the test? I was always passionate about history. I was always fascinated by telling the story to people that didn't have any outward knowledge of history or distrust or passion for it, but they would always lean in for this story and follow it up with, I've never heard that George Washington had a spy ring, or never heard that they did such a incredible job and their contributions were so vital to the success of the spy ring, to the success of the war. So that's why I thought, well, there's a market out here. And then when you watch Bill O'Reilly and the way people embraced a Lincoln story we all know well and there've been movies about, I realized there's a passion for it if told the right way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a big market for people to actually hear stories like this, as opposed to what they've so often been fed, which is to make sure you know that there was something bad about every single American founding father that somebody has unearthed somewhere. But it's interesting. So Washington's famous as a general, but as you know, one of his British foes said he didn't so much outfight the British as he outspied them. And, you know, I think that is a lot less known. Why was Washington so interested in intelligence?
Well, he knew he had to counter a superior foe, and to do that, he had to anticipate their every move and know it before they knew it or as they knew it. And he had to outlast the British. The British did not want to be there. They thought they'll get rid of these colonists, these /farmers, and retake the properties and consider it something that they could bank on. And it couldn't happen because Washington was very resourceful. He had endurance. He was able to inspire his men. And most of all, he was able to frustrate the British, if not beat them head on, by getting somebody on the inside. Now, picture this, New York with somebody on the inside. The British headquarters were located there. There were officers everywhere, but yet they didn't want the economy in America to come to a grinding halt. What they wanted to continue, so they didn't have to rebuild and feed everybody, as you can understand. So if you were in there and you had a reason to be in New York, like, for example, you were a dry goods owner, like one of the spies, Robert Townsend, and you would sell goods to people and be able to interact with some of the British, you had a reason to be there. James Rivington, you wrote a loyalist newspaper. Why shouldn't you be in Manhattan? However, he changed sides in the middle of the war, and when he'd interview these officers, he would put it into a nice little story that would go back to England, but he'd also give it a nice letter and give it to Washington. So he'd always hold something back. And why wouldn't a farmer have to go to Manhattan to pick up some supplies? And that's exactly what we had in Abraham Woodhull. And by the way, if you're a bartender, don't you also need some supplies? If a farmer has to sell, doesn't a bar have to pick up? Yes. So they were going in and out with great cover stories, citizen spies. And to do that, they had to have steels of spine, and they had to have tremendous courage because the British were brutal. And if you need an example of that, we open up the book of George Washington's Secret Six with a failed spy who had a lot of courage but had no experience, and that's Nathan Hale. Within a couple of days of him coming over from Connecticut as a teacher looking for a job, he was found out and was hanged at 66 and 3rd right here in Manhattan. So I was able to walk around and feel this story and then combine with Don and try to tell this story in a compelling, accurate way.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about it that I didn't realize, I actually knew there was some spying. I knew Washington relied on it. I didn't realize how hands-on he was, though, that he's giving advice in tradecraft and how to send secret messages and what to look for and how not to expose themselves. But he was really quite involved in this. It wasn't just sort of in his role as Supreme Commander, this was happening underneath him. He was really treating this as a major part of his campaign himself.
And that's beyond opinion. If you look at the letters, they talk about how Abraham Woodhull, who was known as Culper Sr., would write back to Washington. Just shows a little bit of friction within the spy network. They're human beings, and like any team, there would be some disagreements. Abraham Woodhull said, why is Robert Townsend working? We need him out there infiltrating the British, finding out what's going on with cannons and troop strengths and missions and strategies. And Washington wrote back saying, no, we need him to have a job. He has to have a reason to be there. And you got to ask questions that a Tory would ask. You got to hold yourself in a way that you would look at the colonists / patriots with disdain because you're above them. And at the same time, they had to find a way to to communicate, because there was no computers back then, there was no phone back then, in a way that wouldn't get them killed. So they found, and John Jay pioneered, some invisible ink. So they were able to write a lot of their messages in invisible ink, first on blank pages, and then on regular books like this book might be out. This is the name of the book, but on the inside you might be reading a story. But you open to page 76 in this book, and perhaps, wait, on page 76 you pour some of that, what they call sympathetic stain out, and out come these messages. The cannons are here. The troop morale is here. This is where they're heading next. It's going to be a change in command. They're going to be moving down south. I get the sense that they're onto something, and they do feel as though the French are going to get involved soon. So they're preparing for a quick kill now. All this information was passed on, but in a way that wasn't going to get him killed if someone found this information on them.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is, and this actually compares favorably with some of the British spies that Benedict Arnold was communicating with, their tradecraft was really good. They were compartmentalized. They didn't know who all the other spies were and all things. Given that these were citizen spies, sort of like the citizen soldiers who were fighting elsewhere, how did they learn this stuff?
Well, they learned it Benjamin Talmadge, and he's a guy all your viewers / listeners should find out about, because this guy was by Washington's side, and he wrote a 77-page book that was just invaluable to us, because he told us what it was like fighting next to Washington, what Washington was thinking as he ended the war, and of course in the middle of the war, because he was right there during the war, when they were blown out of New York, when they were stuck in Valley Forge, and when they went back to Connecticut / the Hudson. And he said, listen, Colonel, Major, go into Long Island, find people we can trust and form this ring. And through Talmadge, who would go back and forth across the Long Island Sound, they were able to get the mission and the methods down. And they got better and better as the war lasted. I mean, this was up for 3.5 years. They went back and forth, did Austin Row, the tavern owner, about 100 times. You had Caleb Brewster, someone we have not talked about, who had 6 other guys, a whale boater, who would literally row across the Long Island Sound 26 miles with a cannon on front, weaving in and out of the British Navy. And they got better and better at getting this done. And there was some near misses, and there were some times in which they got great intelligence, and the courier would panic and just rip up the paper before they got on the ferry. That guy was fired, and they get rid of the next guy until they found the right guy. Not that we can blame them, but there were people there that wouldn't throw out this intelligence that Townsend and Rivington and Woodhull risked their lives to obtain. So that's what I found fascinating. Every turn, every twist was more fascinating than the next.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating story. One interesting thing is, although most Americans don't know much about these spies, you mentioned that when you went to CIA headquarters, the historians there know a lot about it, and they're treated as heroes and sort of predecessors.
Oh, yeah. And here's another thing that was really ironic. When we finished the book, I want to just thank all the historians that helped me out. I mean, they didn't agree on a lot. They agreed on some things, not others. I got them together. We debated it out in front, and we just said, I made everyone find out, let me know what they knew verbally. Could you tell me where this is rooted in? So we were able to hash out a lot. But in the end, they did this all to make this book better, which I couldn't be more grateful. So I wanted to throw them a party, even before the first book was sold, before it became a bestseller, obviously. So I go to this one restaurant that was built in the 1740s that has historic significance. And I say, and we have an inn, and they say, yeah, we'll throw your book party. But let me ask you, what is the book about? And I tell them, and the woman stops and says, do you know who I am? I said, no, I'm Bernadette Casey. That was my maiden name. My dad was William Casey. And ironically, he was working on a book about George Washington's spies before Reagan asked him to join the CIA and lead the CIA, which he never finished, but he wanted to finish when he got out of office, but sadly he died in office. So she is all in on that. And she was the one, and William Casey was one of the first ones to write, I want that Nathan Hale statue down. He's a failed spy. Washington should be outside the CIA headquarters.
Well, Nathan Hale paid a big price, but his tradecraft was not the best. These spies actually stayed largely unknown until the 20th century, and in fact, we still don't know the names of all of them. Agent 355, for example. Tell us about her.
Well, I mean, what we know about her, she infiltrated the social circles. We know about her is that she was referenced in one of the letters specifically saying there's another agent about to join us. Well, it's going to be extreme help to 714, which was, they all had numbers, by the way. Washington was 711 and 714 was Townsend. There's going to be extreme help to Townsend. And next thing you know, the intelligence got a lot better. We found out a lot more about the officers. And we also believe that she played a key role in the outing of Benedict Arnold before he would destroy the West Point by turning it over to the British. So she was able to get information from the officers who, by all accounts, almost every account, were drinking like fish because they didn't want to be there. They're sitting there alone in another country still that was trying to form, and they would take Manhattan like it is now, like a party town. So once you get somebody drunk, they talk more. Washington found that out in the French-Indian War when he was able to watch everybody drink and then give great intelligence when he was a colonel, and he was able to use that intelligence, as were others, to have success there. Now they turned the tables, and through 355, there's varying people who have different theories about who she is. Some say it was Sarah Townsend, Robert's sister. Some say it was Anna Strong, who definitely helped because she was the wife of a judge, and she would hang petticoats when there was a message in from Washington and when one had to go out from the spy ring. But I just believe it was somebody in Manhattan, possibly even a British descent that changed during the war.
It's a fascinating story. It really is. Do you think there are lessons for today in this experience?
Yeah, I think there is lessons in today. It's not about you. I mean, that's what it's all about. These men and one woman, that woman lost her life, we believe, before the war ended, the only one. They never took a bow. They never took a dime. They only wanted their expenses covered. In the case of Caleb Brewster, wanted nothing, but did take a musket ball in the neck and wanted to make sure the VA of the yesteryear would take care of him. We found that in letters later on when Washington became president, 7 years after they broke up. There was a barbecue at the end to celebrate. Robert Townsend never showed up. There was indications as we studied Robert Townsend's career arc that he never got his act together like his older brothers and younger brothers did. And there would be letters from his older brothers saying, Robert, the war's over, turn the page. And he couldn't. And my humble opinion is that maybe he suffered from PTSD because of the extreme pressure he was under and the conflicted nature of his operation, because back then, if you were a spy in many circles, even for the right side, there was not a lot of esteem in that. So when the war ended, he went back to his business, successful business, and would go back to Manhattan, but he never really got traction. So they never got any credit. But just to your question, the reason I put the gravestones in the book is because I wanted to underline how little credit they got, how nondescript they lived, and how nondescript they died. But yet, as we uncover their exploits, they just deserve a lot of respect. And thankfully, a lot of them are now appearing in textbooks around the country. And hopefully this book pushes that mission further.
Well, let's hope so. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us about it here.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you reading it. I love the questions, and best of luck.
Thank you. And that's Brian Kilmeade. He's a host at Fox and Friends, and he's got his own radio show as well, which I actually listen to pretty often. And he's the co-author of George Washington's Secret Six, The Spy Ring That Saved the American Revolution. It's a great read. Pick it up for the holidays now. And that's all for this holiday episode of InstaVision. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.